We are victims of our own success right now. Things are subjectively bad, but objectively they've never been this good. And the reason why we've got this felt sense of suffering is we've started putting the cart before the horse. What I mean by this is we've started prioritizing the 1%ers, the things that are marketable online as optimizing our lifestyles and that look good, instead of focusing on the boring things like getting 8 hours of sleep, drinking water, having social connection, and loving your family, meeting them as often as possible. It's incredibly hard for a fish to see water when they're submerged in it constantly. And it's just the nature of where we're at in history and with the way technology's developed, that we happen to be the generation confronting this revolutionary technology and this unprecedented situation completely blind.
The Grateful Podcast with Jack Wagoner presents. Subscribe.
Welcome back to the Grateful Podcast. I'm your host, Jack Wagoner, and today I'm joined by Elliot Bewick, the host of the Next Generation podcast. Elliot dives deep into challenges faced by Gen Z in an increasingly virtual world. As a 19-year-old, he has a very unique perspective on these issues that I myself can relate to. Elliot has explored ideas like fame inflation, Goodhart's law, and the illusion of success in the attention economy. And today we're unpacking all of it. If you've ever wondered why YouTube rewards controversy over solutions, how creators can stay authentic without chasing views, or what the future of online influence looks like, this conversation is for you. We'll talk about the responsibilities of both creators and consumers, the hidden traps of chasing engagement, and how to build content with real depth. Beyond that, we'll also dive into the bigger picture, how Gen Z is navigating relationships, cultural shifts, and the rapid evolution of information consumption. I can't wait for this. Elliot, thanks for coming on, dude.
Thanks for having me, man.
So, you talk a lot about Gen Z. I'm super excited for this because it's one of my first podcasts with someone else in this creator world that's a member of Gen Z. Something I've thought about a lot is that it's not a new phenomenon to worry about the younger generation. It's been going on for ages. People say these new kids are weak, or they have it easier, right? So my question for you is, do you think the problems of our generation can simply be accredited to this idea of us being young and learning how to grow up? Or are we different? Is Gen Z unique?
Yeah, I think it goes both ways, and what's at the crux of this question is what actually is a generation. So I had someone on my show a few months ago called Dr. Jenny Bristow, and she's an expert on generational studies. So I was asking her these questions about what a generation actually is. Is it defined by the characteristics you have at any moment? Well, it can't be, because I'm 19, you're 18, and we're going to be experiencing certain things that are naturally going to be happening just by virtue of us having hit puberty. We're now a little bit older, we're getting into adulthood. We're at that time of our lives when we all have these universal experiences, just like 40-year-olds would in Gen X, or what Gen Y, the millennials, would, or boomers would. So it can't be age. So what is it? And at the crux of it, really, I believe, and a few other psychologists and sociologists and whatever else believe this, someone like Gene Twang, he's good on this, is technology. I think that's at the core of a lot of things that we don't actually attribute it to. And that's what really makes us unique as a generation. Technology, you think about the internet and social media that we're growing up on, but that's not all technology means. You know, it's even back to the first generation when, I don't know, the steam engine was invented. That changed the way they were experiencing their lives. So I do think that some things are just transient and part of growing up and adolescence and becoming an adult. But there are certain things in our generation, Gen Z, specific to the technology that we've had available to us, that we've grown up on, that no one else in history has ever experienced.
Yeah, we have problems that no one else has experienced. And although every generation has had those things, like the steam engine or whatever, I think ours has been a big radical shift that no one knows how to prepare for.
Yeah, I think we're suffering as victims of our own success in many ways, and it's easy to forget that. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and speaking actually, instead of some people our age going towards people like monks and asking them what they think of the current situation. And what it's taught me is that really we are victims of our own success right now. Things are subjectively bad, but objectively they've never been this good. And the reason why we've got this felt sense of suffering is because we've started putting the cart before the horse. And what I mean by this is we've started prioritizing the one percenters, the things that are marketable online as optimizing our lifestyles and that look good, instead of focusing on the boring things like getting 8 hours of sleep, drinking water, having social connection, and loving your family, meeting them as often as possible. That leads to a fundamentally cracked system with room for a lifestyle that looks like one that would bring you happiness, because you've got all of these short-term instant gratification tools at hand. So people are here very confused as to why they're not happy when they're going to saunas, they're hitting the gym and fighting their demons, they're using nose strips to sleep with, but they're still left asking the same question constantly, which is, why do I not fulfilled? Why does my life have no meaning? And why do I feel so deprived of any real reason to pursue anything?
Yeah, we're left with these same key questions everyone's always had, but we try to find solutions in things that no one's ever had.
I saw this really interesting statistic the other day, and it was about actually the success that we are having. And it's a perfect example of how the news and this sort of event bias we have with a 24 news cycle and a 24-hour algorithm on TikTok to scroll through. The events that keep on being fed to us, they don't give us the ability to see these slow burners that accumulate over time and lead to bigger and more important things. So this statistic, it was about extreme world poverty, which is categorized as people living off of less than $1.90 a day. 200 years ago, 80% of the planet lived in extreme poverty. Now today, it's 8%. So 1 in 20 people, rather than 8 out of 10 people, are now living in extreme poverty. Now, obviously, we don't want anyone to be living in extreme poverty, but that's a huge improvement. And by the way, 37% of that decrease came in the last 40 years. So this is what I mean by us objectively living in better conditions than ever. We have the ability to eat pretty much whenever we want, unrestricted, but it's not that causes the problem in terms of a lack of something. It's actually, rather than suffering from a lack of resources, we're suffering from contending with overabundance and how to restrict ourselves.
Right. I saw something along those lines of like how objectively good we are. Our reading rates, literacy rates around the world are another one of those statistics that are incredibly high compared to even 50 years ago. And so in all of these measures, our species continues to see more and more success. And yet, right now, our generation is suffering from high suicide rates and high depression rates and this growing chasm between genders that is so interesting. People seem to be so divided. Why do you think that people are divided among this objective success?
I think there are different factors at play. One of them linked to this overabundance that I'm talking about and the contention we have with that is that we actually get led to make up some problems, make up issues for our entertainment. It's classic, when you're sat in high school and you're with people that you're not too familiar with, the first thing you do, or maybe just I do, maybe I'm just a prick, is you go towards the negative, cynical things and you bond over those. You bond over the hatred of an outgroup or a teacher or a subject, rather than taking the risk of proclaiming that you love something and hoping that you both share that. So that's one thing, is just boredom amongst this overabundance. But another thing is social media and the incentives at play. There are no incentives really at the moment, at least if you want to take a shortcut to get to success. And we can speak about what that means versus what people think it means. There's no incentive there to be nuanced and take it slow and have in-depth conversations like we're having now, really. What would get more views and more comments and more engagement would be if we had a debate and one of us tried to dunk on the other person, right? Because we've all got this negativity bias as humans, and we all want to see crazy shit. And, you know, I do too, but I have to keep on reminding myself that sometimes it's not for the best, and you know, it's obvious stuff, but just because something feels the best to watch and consume, it doesn't mean that it's the healthiest for you. So social media algorithms, they promote this bifurcation, this divide of the sexes that you see, and everything else. You see it in politics, you see it in different arguments. People come to these radical conclusions and they get pushed. And I think pushed is actually the wrong word, pulled by the algorithms into their own echo chambers, and they stay there.
On these lines of social media and the way they pull you towards these things, I saw you posted a video that I thought it was so good. You called it "Why I, a Teenager, Hope TikTok Gets Banned Forever." I thought that was really interesting because I agree with you. I think that TikTok should be banned. I think that any of the negative effects it has had completely dwarf any of the positive effects it's had on the world as a whole. What I found really interesting about that, and the almost epiphany I had while watching your video, is the people that need to reject TikTok, the people that need a TikTok ban to help them with their lives the most, are the ones that are the most against it. They're the ones that can't see that they're addicted. I personally accept the fact that I'm addicted to social media. I think it's a silly thing to say I'm not. I'm also for a ban against it. But the people that are suffering the most at the hands of the problem are the ones that are least for the easiest solution to the problem.
Yeah. I don't think that's anything unique to social media addiction. I think it's the same with any addiction, you know. The darkest hour is always right before dawn, and it's the same with these people that are addicted. They're so far in, and they can get out. They can start moving towards the light, but it's so hard to see anything, to see light at the end of the tunnel when you're that far in. And I also just think it's this thing of wanting to stay connected as social creatures. When I really dig into why I want to open up TikTok and my thumb gravitates towards Instagram whenever I open up my phone to check my emails or text, it's because I have this innate sense of satisfaction connecting with people and staying on track and staying on top of all the trends that are going on, because as social creatures, we don't want to miss out on what everyone else is doing. So I think that definitely feeds into this difficulty people have to stop scrolling. Is it's not like smoking or meth where there's this obvious impact on your health and you see yourself deteriorate, sometimes very fast. It's this invisible sort of carbon monoxide poisoning that gradually creeps up on you, but you don't feel it. In fact, you feel the opposite. You feel this sense of satisfaction because you're keeping up with people, you're staying in the loop. But I saw this really interesting article, and it was just getting me to ask myself, what news articles do you even remember from the last year? Like, what news articles do you remember that you read? And I'd transfer this over from that legacy article that I saw to TikTok or Instagram. Like, what Instagram or TikTok posts do you really remember from the last year? And I would say practically none off the top of my head, compared to if you asked me what long form YouTube videos do you remember from the last year, or podcasts that you listen to on Spotify, I could reel off a bunch because they've been way more life changing than some guy from India getting his leg run over by a train in India on Twitter. So it's it all comes down to this feeling of actually productivity. Ironically, scrolling makes you even more reluctant to stop because you think by stopping you're going to be going back when all you're going to be doing is taking a step in the right direction, in my opinion.
What do you mean by going backwards?
Going away from achieving anything.
Okay.
I think when people are rotting in bed and they don't have any real goal that they're moving towards long term, the only thing they have left is the feeling of connectivity with other people. And it's an illusion because these are all parasocial relationships when you're watching creators. They don't know you. They don't give a fuck about you, at least in a personal sense. Maybe they care about attracting your target audience, but especially if it's not any content geared towards making you live a more meaningful and fulfilled life or making you laugh, like they're doing it for views. So I think that's why it's so scary for people to stop scrolling, even if they don't necessarily consciously realize it. They would feel, and you know, some of them would be right. Like when you cut people off from the real world to get stuck in this goon loop that tickles your system, where you've got video games to satisfy some urges and give you a sense of reward, then you've got porn to fulfill your sexual desires instantly, at least short term, and then it runs out, and then you have another wank, and then you have TikTok to fill this instant dopamine kick that you want to get. It goes round in a triangle. You cut off all your friends from the real life. You stop all the sport activities that you were doing, all these different extracurricular clubs. You don't have anything left except that triangle that you keep on fulfilling. So if you get rid of that triangle as well, that goon loop, you're left with nothing.
Okay. That's so interesting. By committing yourself to these things that deprive you of what we would normally call the meaningful things in life, it's all you're left with. And so you would have to go through a moment of like absolute nothingness if you were to cut that out. So it's scary, I guess.
Yeah. And it's difficult to convince someone that they need to take a step back to take 10 forwards. So I don't necessarily think I'd even recommend completely removing yourself from that straight away and just going cold turkey. It's the same with any addiction. You don't just get someone to stop everything that they're doing. You need to give them a reason to, first of all, and then you need to put in gradual steps to help them work towards achieving what they really want to achieve in life when they think hard enough.
Do you try to help your friends with social media addiction?
Yes. I try to help my friends in many different ways, and I think that's something that we've forgotten to do as a generation. I don't want to say too much, but I went into town the other week with some close friends, and it was really upsetting seeing how much they care about each other, but the reluctance they have to actually help each other. So there's this illusion of compassion where people think being nice means avoiding conflict and agreeing with everything someone says. That's not what love is. That's not what compassion is. That's not what a good friend does. The good friend drags you out of a hole that you're in and you want to stay in, and they say you're better than this, not it's okay, you'll get better at some point. So I try and help my friends, and I'm very cautious in the way I do it because I don't want to be so annoying that they actually go in the opposite direction and end up doing these bad things even more just to sort of spite me. But I try and just have honest conversations with them, flag what I think are issues, and ultimately it comes down to just not lying. It's something that someone like Jordan Peterson talks about all the time. Don't lie. Always tell the truth is what he says, or at least don't lie. And I think when you start implementing really, really simple things like that into your life, they're much more digestible, they're easier to follow, and they've been incredibly effective for me since I started doing that.
I recently had on Nick Pollard. I don't know if you've heard of him.
No.
He was on Modern Wisdom. He goes by the people displeaser. So he's a coach to help people stop people pleasing. And we had an interesting conversation about what kindness really is. And it was really parallel to what you just said, where he believes there's such a stark difference between kindness and niceness. And you should be the friend that tells your friend when they have something in their teeth or when they're doing something wrong. His example was, if your friend's girlfriend is cheating on them, would you tell them? And you need to be the type of person, if you want to be a really good friend, that puts the truth over the discomfort you're going to feel in the moment of telling the truth.
I think sitting with discomfort is inherently difficult to do. And especially when you're spending time with people that you do care about, but that you're also there to have a good time with. Yeah. It's very hard to suddenly pick them up on something that you think is leading them astray. And I find myself doing this calculation all the time in my head. Maybe I'm an overthinker, but it's like, should I tell them about this or should I just leave it? Like, there's always this thing like, come on, it will be fine. Just leave it. There's no point doing it. And I always try really hard to consciously overpower that little voice on my shoulder that tells me to leave it, because I think from what I've seen, at least, people always appreciate and admire you for being truthful. Even if it does come with short-term pain, that's not what people remember. They don't remember those small moments of discomfort. They remember the way you made them feel over the course of months and years and what you did for them.
Right. Yeah, they remember who you are as a whole. And also, I think an important thing is like building trust with your friends that what you say is real. So if you're trying to validate them and be the person that makes them feel good in the moment rather than like builds them up over time, when you actually give them a compliment, they won't know if you're being real or not. So I know personally I struggled with like being a people pleaser. That's why that conversation with Nick was so valuable to me. But since I've shifted to being more truthful and just Jordan Peterson's don't lie, I realize my word has a lot more value. And so if I want to call my friend out on something they're doing on their phone, that has a lot more value now.
Yeah. Mean what you say and say what you mean. I think that's a very simple way of putting it. Be concise with your words is another thing that Jordan Peterson says, not to overquote him now, but it's something that I think is really good for people our age to hear, because it's another thing that we do when we're uncomfortable. And this is one of the biggest things that I do. I love talking to people. I'm naturally an extrovert, but when I get uncomfortable in conversations, because I'm an extrovert, instead of seizing up, I overspeak. And it means that I throw out things that I don't really mean. And I'm not doing that on purpose. I'm not doing that to lie. It's just by nature of speaking too much rather than thinking about what I'm meaning to say. You throw out a bunch of shit. So I know that there are a lot of people that will be in the same boat as me. And it's really tiresome to do this at first, but I promise it gets easier and easier. And that's just to really try hard, play this game of chess in the way you have conversations. Try to always be 2 or 3 steps ahead and mean what you say and say what you mean.
100%. Yeah, I've dealt with that as well. I'm a good talker, so it's almost like a crutch for me in situations where if I don't know what to say or if I feel uncomfortable, I'll fill it with meaningless words. I think podcasting's really helped me become more intentional with what I say. But I had something to go back to. So when you're talking about like being in a group setting with your friends, something I heard you say one time was like there's this peer pressure around scrolling and like, oh come on, and it's almost like you can conflate it with drugs and alcohol at this point where, come on man, just scroll one more time, like scroll a little, you know. um, I think it's really hard to be conscious about your habits and social media when everyone around you is just in it and not cognizant of its effects on you, and it's hard to be the outlier. It's hard to be the sore thumb.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult to, you know, separate the wheat from the chaff when you don't know anything better. It's incredibly hard for a fish to see water when they're submerged in it constantly. And it's just the nature of where we're at in history and with the way technology's developed that we happen to be the generation confronting this revolutionary technology and this unprecedented situation completely blind. It's so difficult to have that historical context because we always feel like we're living in the future almost, and that because we are, right, there's never been a more modern situation than now, obviously, by definition of us being in the current moment. And because of that, we think that everything's perfect, or at least we have the natural predisposition to believe that everything's fine. So it's ever more difficult to be someone that stands up and goes against the grain. And I think usually it takes a bit more age and wisdom to be able to see that, a bit more studying of history, a bit more reading books, a bit more getting stung in life and realizing that everything isn't perfect. But I just think that if you look hard enough, you can already see at our age that there are things that are normal now. They're completely adopted by our generation, and they shouldn't be. That's always going to be the case. The world's never going to be perfect. And our challenge, especially if you want to be someone that's a leader and that tries really hard to help as many other people as possible and put out good, valuable content that guides a generation in the direction of flourishing rather than suffering, you have to be on alert to what those things are, and you have to be ready to go against the grain. There are certain things that are going to go against the grain completely. You know, they used to think that the sun orbited around the Earth, and then it took someone to stand up against that and say, no, the Earth orbits the sun. And most of them got killed. They were heretics, right? Because they were going against what was the common belief. So, not to quote Andrew Gold's very successful podcast, Heretics, but you need to be a modern day heretic, and you need to have the bravery and courage to call out what you think is wrong based on objective data, based on what you're seeing with friends. And I wouldn't devalue anecdotal evidence at all as well. It has its part. You have to call it out. And sometimes that will be completely counterintuitive to what everyone else thinks.
As a creator, how do you go against the grain as a podcaster?
I don't think you should strive to go against the grain for the sake of it, but you have to be ready to go against the grain in pursuing what you think is the truth.
Interesting. So I had this really interesting conversation Tuesday with his name is Rabbi Monis Friedman, and he's a rabbi. He has like 600,000 subscribers, really popular, but he says some extremely controversial things. So it was a really interesting conversation. And I talked to him about the truth. You just mentioned truth. It's something we hear so much. Like there's this objective truth, this idea of truth. He believed it to be, God's word, the Bible. That's objective truth. As a generation, we've lost a lot of. There's not as much religious affiliation now. I know it's trending back toward it a little bit, but how do you believe we can define this idea of truth in our day and age when the Bible isn't just the word, straight black and white.
Yeah, I'm sick of hearing this my truth thing, and I've no idea how it's crept into our vocabulary as a generation. It's the most retarded thing I've ever heard. It's like saying my 1+1. Like, just because you can't fucking count and you think that 1+1 = 3, it doesn't mean that your 1+1 has any value. So we need to start accepting that some things are objectively true, and that's the end of it. I don't know how to give a pithy summarization of what the truth actually would be defined as, at least up to the standards that I would want to be able to give it, because people would just punch holes in my definition philosophically. But the truth is something that is undisputable, and it doesn't matter what lens you're viewing it through, doesn't matter about the human experience. It's just fundamentally true. Something like 1+1 being 2, and there's more complexities to it. People spend like 3 hours trying to work out an explanation for why 1+1 actually equals 2, all these crazy overly thought things. But like, let's not go too deep, and let's just see what's, inherently obvious.
Yeah.
And get away from this my truth thing, this subjectivity bridged over to objectivity. And it's just semantics, it's just wordplay. People saying my truth just mean my opinion, and they might just be misusing it. I don't think it's out of spite. I think it's Haslon's razor. Correct me if I'm wrong if you know this. I can't remember. I think it's Haslon's razor, but it's like, never attribute malice to what can be explained merely by stupidity. And yeah. I think this is true with a lot of things, including what I do. Sometimes people just misconstrue it, and they try and summarize something that's like subjective, and there isn't necessarily a truth. And instead of using that in their experience, it's what they felt, they make this leap from their experience to what's true.
Right. I think we have inherently little power as individuals. And I mean, all right, our perspective is our world, so it makes sense why we would believe what we experience is true. But I don't know, it seems like there's this increasing trend to just state truth when you have no believability. There's this book behind me called Principles by Ray Dalio. Recommend it. But he talks about believability weighted decision making, where the best decisions in any scenario are to be made by people who have done something 3 times minimum successfully. And if someone has experienced something and done it successfully, that's when you can believe what they say. They're believable. They have proof behind what they say. But just because someone experiences something or feels a certain way or has a certain emotion, it doesn't mean their idea is worth listening to. Not everyone's opinion is worth listening to.
I think that everyone's opinion is worth listening to, even if it's just working out that some ideas are really stupid. But yeah, I completely agree with you. It's very difficult to separate people from their ideas. And I think it goes both ways. Just because someone's successful, it doesn't mean that their advice is any good. And maybe they just got really fucking lucky. Like, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there, especially in the age that we're in with technology and paid ads and fake followers. Like, I'm sure there are a lot of people that just use their daddy's money. And then there are also people that haven't proved themselves yet, that maybe never will because they have other priorities than being these hotshot gurus that have incredible value. So the question is, how do you choose who to take advice from? And it's a genuine conundrum that I struggle with. But the way I approach it is that everyone is worth speaking to. I'm naturally curious to hear anyone's life story, whether they're a bin man or whether they're one of the biggest podcasters in the world. And from that, if you're following the principle of not lying, of also believing in your intuition a little bit, you start to put pieces together. You look at some of the professional big dogs quoting data, but then you also look at these other random people that you meet in the grocery shop or whatever. And you slowly piece together your worldview. You slowly work out who's bullshitting you, who's not.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's all you can do. You can take one step forward at a time. You have to stay curious, stay open, and never die on the hill of something for the sake of looking good. Die on the hill of something, sure, if you genuinely believe in it. But I think we get way too caught up in dying on the hill of things and just being completely shut off from having our opinion changed just for the sake of preserving face. And it was really interesting. I was at this dinner the other night, and one of the speakers there was Warren Farrell. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's a really famous author. He's done amazing work with putting out awareness to the value of male role models and the role dads play in their, specifically sons, but kids' lives. He was explaining the evolutionary reason for why people are so averse to having their opinion challenged. And it's obvious once he outlined it. I wrote it down because I'd never even thought about it, but it became really obvious after. Evolutionarily, if you're in a tribe and someone disagrees with you, they're a threat. So you're going to hold on to your belief and you're going to fight them. You don't want to give up that belief and lose face and trust in the tribe. So we all have this natural tendency to put up a fight and be on guard when someone tries to challenge us. But I think it's something that I'm working really hard on, is not letting my guard down, because you do have to be on guard for misinformation and bullshit, but being open to people's advice and not getting defensive when they challenge what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Hearing you, I actually take back what I said right before that. I want to rephrase what I said. I do believe that everyone's worth listening to. I don't think that everyone's advice is worth implementing. I think there's a key difference there, where I love listening to people. I love talking to people. I don't care about their prerequisites or when I'm talking to them. I'll talk to anybody. And I think everyone's human experience is unique to them. And so they have a unique perspective that I could learn from. But someone that's never ever podcasted before giving me advice on podcasting, I don't think, like, maybe I'll listen to what they have to say and I'll analyze that advice they're giving me, but I'm much less likely to implement it than if I'm listening to some like world-class podcaster that's proven his knowledge works, if that makes sense.
Yeah, go with a guru's advice for sure over that. And I would have a natural skepticism to anyone that is giving you advice about something that they don't have any stack of proof for. I would still be open to their advice because it might be the most valuable thing you receive. Way more valuable than the podcaster who's done 700 episodes and is so far in deep that they can't see the wood from the trees. So there is this real value in people that are coming in cold. It's the same as like beginner's luck, you know. You're able to just poke holes in things that the experts miss. But definitely I've grown up and always erred on the side of caution instead of generosity, of people trying to give me advice about shit that frankly they know nothing about. Like, I wouldn't walk down my road and take financial advice from the homeless person outside my grocery store.
Exactly. And although that seems obvious, I think that, I mean, a lot of people just are so eager to succeed, and they will take advice from people. Because, I mean, that's personal connection matters. What we hear from people matters to us. We want to make people happy around us. And yeah, maybe the thing that person's saying is true. Maybe it's worked for them. Maybe it's bullshit, you know? But always being open-minded to what you're hearing and not shutting anything out, but also not accepting anything at face value is something that's hard to balance, because there's a spectrum with it. But like anything, we're humans and we want to make an easy black and white decision.
Definitely. Nothing's ever going to be that simple. So
No.
you have to stay cautious, stay open, but ultimately use your discernment and use it wisely rather than just gravitating towards the fastest reply or comment on what you're doing.
Right. Exactly. If you're enjoying this episode of the Grateful Podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you could either share this podcast episode with friends and family, or kindly leave a review down below on whatever podcast platform you're listening on. It would help me be able to make this podcast better for you, better for all my other listeners. Thank you. Enjoy the show. So one thing I really wanted to touch on is this idea of fame inflation, I think you called it, or internet inflation, where, well, actually, I want you to explain it, because I've heard you talk about it a few times, but I found it fascinating, and it's something I'd never heard about before.
Yeah, so like a currency inflates, the same thing I think is going on with views, and we're eternally online now, so the value of a view is inflating. Like if you scroll past something on X, you probably, as we've discussed earlier, don't remember it 2 minutes later, let alone a month later. Whereas the producer, looking at their analytics, sees all these views and they're proud of themselves because they think they're succeeding, and they think that 1,000 views equates to 1,000 people listening to every word on the edge of their seat, when it's just not true. So I think that this bias we have towards measuring people's success with views and striving towards that at all costs is going to pop eventually. And I don't know how extreme that bubble burst will be, but one thing I am certain on is that the creators that provide genuine, valuable content that changes people's lives, whether it's motivational, mindset, or just changes their lives by making them piss themselves from laughter, those are the people that are going to survive, not the gurus that actually don't have any real advice. It's just quick fixes that sound good, but actually are worthless.
So how do you balance as a creator right now? I mean, I struggle with this too. Like these clickbaity titles and thumbnails and optimization for views, while also trying to stay as authentic to your message as possible.
Sell people what they think they want. Give people what they actually need. So I don't think there's any shame in hamming up a title, as long as you're not being disingenuous to the actual content that's beyond that packaging. And it's a constant battle. I'm not going to give you the answer in this podcast, because I used to produce a podcast that was massive, and this was like, at least what it felt, like 90% of my job, just balancing getting views, getting the worthy engagement from your content that you deserve, with not losing authenticity. So it's something that I'm constantly fighting too. There's no quick fix answer, but I think ultimately, you know, when you're clickbaiting. Everyone does, just like you know when you're lying. And the one thing that I keep asking myself, and that I've always asked myself when I've been producing content for other channels, is this something that I would watch? And if it's not, then you better switch something up fast.
I forget who I heard talk about it, but on some podcasts, there was a guy that said, I want to create the content that someone would watch in the metro, in the subway, like in public. I don't want to produce the content that someone's scared of showing their friends. Like, I want to be proud of what I'm doing, and I want it to be the thing that people are proud of watching, not the type of thing that you're insecure about consuming, if that makes sense.
Yeah, completely. And again, just ask yourself, would you be proud of the content that you're making in 30 years' time? And I really want to hammer this point home. That doesn't mean trying to change people's lives every episode or vlog that you're doing. It could just be genuinely giving someone relief from their stressful day at work or school, and giving them an unboxing video of some new makeup brand, if that's what you want to go down. But the thing that asking that question will avoid is people that make content purely as a grifter and in the pursuit of views. Like, I'm sure even these makeup channels, a lot of them, even if they're not something that you and I or a female version of us would ever do, they probably really care about what they're doing, and they're not doing it for views. They're doing it because it's a passion of theirs and they will be proud of it in 30 years' time.
That's interesting. So it's just that authenticity piece. Have you listened to Rick Rubin at all?
No.
Okay. Do you know who he is?
I've heard his name, but I have no idea.
Okay, so he's like freaking all-time music producer. He's produced so many albums. He's amazing. He has this massive white beard. You should look up a picture after this. He's pretty cool looking. But he talks about in his book The Creative Act, A Way of Thinking. He talks about how the audience should come last. And when I hear this word authenticity, that's often what I think about. But it's the exact opposite from what anybody learning how to grow on social media does. I mean, if I'm asking someone or looking up how do I make a better YouTube video, is think of what your audience wants. How do you optimize for your audience's wants and needs? But his thing is create for yourself, and an audience that has similar interests will emerge, and that's when it becomes the most authentic, and that's the type of art or media that you'd want to consume as a consumer.
Yeah, I think this goes down to just the toxicity that's been implemented in the word authenticity. It's been completely misconstrued. And this goes deeper than just creating content. This feeds into people's lives as a whole. This word of authenticity and what it means. People always speak about being their authentic selves, and they think that means rotting in bed for some reason and being lazy. And being authentic with people, like a first date, is telling them about all the problems that you have. And being authentic with the girlfriend that you have means letting her see you dirty and unwashed and scrolling on TikTok all day with your filthy bed sheets. That's not what authenticity is. And again, it's a difficult thing to grapple with. But would you say that that's your authentic self? Or would you say that your authentic self is the person that wants to fulfill their ambitions and show people the best version of themselves and inspire others, maybe in our case? Because I would say that this is my authentic self now, because I'm being honest and I'm doing what I really want to do, and I'm trying to be the force for good in the world that I'm trying to actually be long term. Not me when I get into bed and I'm eating a McDonald's because I've had a really hard gym session. Like, sure, that might be what you do in your life, but you have to be very careful not to get these concepts jumbled up of authenticity and glorifying your low points. There's a big difference there. So this feeds into what we were talking about with the content. People are scared of being authentic because they think it means showcasing you when you've just taken a shit and haven't wiped your ass yet. That's not what it means. You can still be your authentic self by putting out amazing polished content and being this really engaging person. Like, that is still authentic as long as it's in line with what you truly believe. And that's going to do really well because your authentic self in many cases is the best version of yourself. So don't be scared to be authentic. And also, just in terms of dating and relationships, you don't need to look like shit constantly to be in an understanding and quality relationship. Like, maybe actually you want to make the effort for your girlfriend and you want her to feel special. So you're going to make sure that you are dressed up nice and that you've made her breakfast and whatever else. Like, that's the authentic self that I want to be. And I think it's a good aspiration to have compared to being in a relationship with someone that accepts you for being less than what you could be.
That's huge, dude. That idea that authenticity isn't your worst self. Authenticity doesn't have to be everything about you. I see when I see people labeled as authentic creators, I feel like a lot of time they're the type that like cry on camera, and I don't know. There's nothing wrong with crying on camera, I guess, but it's like, why do you want to put that out to the world? I think we have this idea that being authentic online means crying or showing every part of who you are, when that's not really authenticity. You can be authentic to yourself while also not showing the entire world the parts of you that you don't want to show the world. That's okay. You can have parts of yourself that are private. Being authentic does not mean everything about you, from the minuscule details of I don't know. I just think there's this idea that authenticity is everything, when it's really just being true to who you are.
Yeah, and there's been this constant encroachment on where our privacy actually lies. So I think it's an old phrase from decades ago, but there was this idea of the political being the personal, and people rebelled against it because they didn't want the political to be personal. They wanted the separation from all the noise and bullshit that goes on. And it's been the same thing since the internet got invented and social media's come along and all these personalized algorithms and this idea of authenticity. The goalposts have shifted to where, imagine like 15 years ago, if people were posting them crying in their car, like it would have never happened, or on TV. It would have been a really odd concept. Whereas now you scroll past it because you're like, oh, not another one of these. So there has been this shift in what's actually just socially acceptable online to showcase. And I wonder where it's going to end. I mean, it's slowly being normalized to sleep with 1,000 guys in the space of like 12 hours and make a challenge out of it. Although that's like an extreme situation and completely not what usually goes on. But the point is that the goalposts have shifted with what we showcase online. I don't know when that's going to end. I also do at the same time disagree with all of these conservatives that say you should have some digital modesty and you shouldn't post something online that you wouldn't show to your grandma, or that you should never take any photos and post them of yourself. You should only maybe use it to document the places that you visited. I disagree with that. I think that it's nice to post content of cool events you've been to, or even just a selfie because you feel like you're looking good. There's no shame in that at all. So I think whilst maybe we should be careful with showcasing too much, we also need to be careful that we don't go the other way, in my opinion, and become super, super boring.
Right. Well, I think the pendulum, it's going to swing back at some point, and we'll find equilibrium. I mean, we're seeing that in a lot of ways right now. Like, just society is going to an extreme point in a lot of places, and I think it's definitely going to shift back to the middle at some point. But my big thing with like, the people crying online and things like that is, why is the first thing you think to do when you're having a bad moment pull out your phone and film yourself? I think that's just a question about our generation, because that's a new thing. That's a new phenomenon that I'm fascinated about. Like, how is it that we've been trained, or we've been conditioned to think, yeah, I'm having a really hard moment right now. What should I do? I should pull out my cell phone and film myself during this hard moment.
Yeah, it's like Pavlovian conditioning, the most simpling form of training something to do anything, like getting a dog to have their mouth water every time a bell rings, because you ring the bell when they get served food, so their mouth is watering, and then you don't serve the food, but you still ring the bell, and their mouth still waters because they've been used to having that response to the bell when the food comes. And it's the same thing, but with filming yourself. It's like, okay, I'm having a bad time. I'm going to get my camera out. I'm going to film it, and it's going to get a lot of views. I'm going to get all these comments that say, I hope you're getting better, and I hope you're feeling good now that you've gotten through this. The loop continues. Like, why would you stop if you can monetize your sadness?
Right.
instead of actually. Do you know what? It's weird. Like in that situation, being constantly sad, at least short term, like is almost better than just fixing your shit. Because if you fix your shit, like you're no longer getting money and getting views. So the smart thing to do, short term at least, is to keep on not dealing with your problems and instead just posting about them, which is crazy.
Right. Well, I think that's one reason why online authenticity feels so inauthentic, is because we know that these people are getting rewarded for these negative emotions. So how do we know that they're real? And social media has all of a sudden become so untrustworthy. It's really hard to trust this person you're seeing on the other end of the screen. Trust that they're even a real person, I guess, is something we're trending toward. And so the empathy of it is really going down, I feel like.
Yeah, and it's more dangerous than taking things with a pinch of salt. Like we're always slightly skeptical of TV hosts and actors in movies. We know it's staged to a certain extent with the TV shows, and that it's completely staged with the movies. So we take it with a pinch of salt. Whereas the thing that's more dangerous than being fed these unrealistic standards or being shown people in genuine distress, in false stress, and taking it with a pinch of salt, is actually thinking that people are being authentic when they're not. Because in that situation, rather than not taking something as gospel and being like, yeah, I kind of see the point, I see the things that they're saying, they probably agree with what they're saying roughly, but I'm going to take it with a pinch of salt. You're like, oh, this person says they're authentic, so they must be, and therefore I'm going to listen to them. And like, this is a trap that, to put it into an example with me, I had to try very hard to avoid when starting a podcast, because I'd been around these pros for 3 years when I was producing trigonometry that I used to work for. And because I'd been with them constantly in the studio, working with them, filming their stuff, I could have very easily come into this game thinking that I know everything, been underprepared for interviews, and just sort of had a shit time. But I understood that even though I thought I was seeing everything as it was, like the game doesn't stop when they go home. That's actually when they were doing their preparation for guests, when they were probably practicing speaking or whatever. So the most dangerous thing for me would have been to think I know everything, because I've got even more of a reason to believe I do, because I've been surrounded by these pros, when actually I don't. It's the same thing with authenticity, if that makes any sense. You know, it's more dangerous to think that things are true when they're not, and have this sort of authentic falsity being thrown around, rather than actually if people just said, like, I'm on social media, this is an inaccurate representation of my life as I have in my Instagram bio.
I like that.
Take it with a pinch of salt.
Yeah. In a sense, it's a little sad. I like to believe people. I like to be a believer of what someone's saying. I like to take someone at face value, but it's been hard, and it's been an adjustment to realize none of this is real. None of this is accurate. And that's kind of sad, because I think social media was invented for it to be something it's not.
Something I've been thinking about a lot is the example of Gymshark influencers and all the other fitness guys and girls on steroids, and how there's been this flip from people lying about being on steroids and saying that they were natural because it was shamed, to people being open about it. And before, when they were lying, you took what they were saying with a pinch of salt, and you thought, I'm going to work towards this guy's physique or this girl's physique, and even though I really want to look like them, I will maybe settle for something close or resembling them, at least, because they might be on steroids. Whereas now, when people have been authentic about the amount of steroids they're using, they've opened up and told the partial truth. People then copy them. They take the same amount of steroids that they're authentically and truthfully taking, and actually the full truth wasn't being told. They were taking 10 times more steroids than they were actually saying online, or they were being truthful about their dosages, but they weren't being truthful about the side effects, the back knee that they have that you never see because they only take pictures front on, the horrible headaches and heart palpitations and fainting episodes they have. So in the first example, people have this illusion of people being natural and sort of being maybe honest, but they take it with a pinch of salt. They're not getting on steroids. Whereas now what you're seeing is people see only the positives of steroid use, the success, the physique, whatever else. So they jump into it thinking that these people have been authentic and have told them the full truth, which is way more dangerous, because then once they've started this steroid dosage, they go, fuck, I'm nowhere near as big as this guy because I don't have the same genetics, or I'm not taking the same dosage, and my back is completely covered in acne. I can't even lie down to go to sleep because they all burst and make me want to cry.
Yeah, that's so dangerous, just showing the people just showing the positives of it. And I think it's really interesting that shift towards what we call authenticity is a root cause of these consequences.
And I don't know what's better. Like, I don't know what
Right.
I prefer. If I'd prefer them being slightly more truthful or lying about it, I haven't made up my mind yet. But from what I've seen, both anecdotally and in stats about steroid usage, like, it was better when they were all lying about not taking steroids.
Which is so interesting. That's like so counter authenticity, or whatever the definition of authenticity is. How do you manage authenticity in your podcast?
I think it's easier for me because I'm young. So to me, it's obvious that I'm going to make mistakes. And a lot of adults, it's obvious to them too. They'd just be punching down on some teenager if they gave me any proper criticism. So that's why I was so keen to start this podcast at an early age, because I am very much protected. So I think it's just being clear that you're on a journey with your audience, and you're going to make fuck ups. You're going to say things that you don't mean. You're going to say things that you mean, but then change your mind on. And that's just part of the game, man.
Yeah, I think you're right. Being young is definitely an advantage, because with older people, I feel like I can ask questions that not everyone could get away with asking. Because I can come at it from a standpoint of I'm a curious 18-year-old, not I'm asking this question to argue with you or to make a judgment. If you embrace that open-mindedness, that youngness, that youth, I think that's a real weapon to staying authentic.
Yeah. I always like to tell people when they ask me for advice about how I got to where I am at this age, I always speak about this false perception we have of what people really care about when you're going for employment or when you're starting a podcast. We think that the only currency available to us is the stack of proof we have, the experience that we have. It's just not true. The more valuable currency in that game is potential. And it's something that we all have in abundance at a young age, because our life outcomes haven't been determined yet, and we can determine what they are. So being brave and being curious and taking on challenges at a young age, like, it's the best thing you can do. And it's also the time when you're going to be afforded the most amount of patience, because people understand that you have this potential and they really want to see you succeed and become what you want to become. But they also understand that you haven't had the time to build up this experience. And once you do, their patience is less, their patience is thinner with you, right? Because you've got this experience, you've got a reason to be perfect or near perfect. And like, if they get pissed off at you then for doing your job wrong that you've done the last 30 years, that's more understandable.
Huh. That's really interesting. Yeah. I've thought about it, but not quite to that extent.
I was at
yeah.
that same dinner with Warren Farrell. It was all about raising kids, ironically, and I don't plan on doing that anytime soon. But it was raising a resilient family in a generation of anxiety. So one of the things that the panelists said was that your kids either rise or fall to your expectations, whatever you put on them. And it's so true. Like, whenever you get challenged as a young person, you really want to rise to that bar that's being set and smash it out the park. Whenever you get set low standards, you're going to take that. So from our perspective, trying to be high agency individuals, we better make sure that we set the bar high.
Right. Where's the bar for you? What do you expect yourself to do in, I don't know, let's say 5 years? What are your goals?
For me, it's more every day. It's more of an everyday experience. The thing of wrestling with where the bar is and climbing over it. So in everything I do, I just try to do my best, and that's something that you'd hear in an elementary school, like plastered up on the wall as a quote. But
Yeah.
it's the most powerful thing you can believe in, and the most powerful thing you can follow. Like, it's just obvious to me that if you give everything your best, and the next time you do it, you try and do it better, follow the line, like, you're going to get better and better until you're world class. So
Right.
whether it's relationships, whether it's work, whether it's this podcast that I hope one day will be my full-time work, even though it won't feel like a job at all. It's just about bringing the best version of yourself to the table, preparing more than other people, and it's all going to work itself out if you follow those things.
Right. Trust the process, I guess. I think getting caught up in a big long-term goal is, and yeah, it's something I've struggled with. I definitely struggle with immediate gratification of things. With this podcast, I've told myself I'm going to give it 4 years. I'm planning on going to university, so I'm still in high school. Do you call that secondary school in England?
It depends what age group you are in high school. So being 18, you'd actually be at our college now, but our college isn't university. Okay. It's 2 years before university.
Okay. Yeah, so I plan on going to university, and I've told myself, like, while I'm there, I have to focus on this throughout all that time, and then after that, I can reevaluate where I stand with this. And I think that's something I've had with my goals that has been huge for me, that give yourself a time frame and reevaluate it after that. With my previous business, I gave myself 10 months. And after 10 months, I realized, okay, this wasn't fulfilling. So I didn't continue to do it. But I try not to set long-term outcome goals. I try to set long-term work goals. So put a system in place where I can continue to work for a certain amount of time so that I can reevaluate where I stand at the end of it. Because I think if I make my goals all about an outcome, I'm much more likely to get discouraged or burnt out or not actually reach that outcome.
I think having something that orients you in one direction for most of your life, a big goal that you want to achieve, is crucial. And that's even something that could come in the form of a God that you believe in. You're doing everything in sort of the name of this God that you worship. But even just having this mission that you want to achieve, if you don't frame it in the right way, the mission becomes so big that it gets forgotten in the mundane day-to-day activities. So the whole reason that religion works, as someone that's agnostic and open to God being a thing, but also not won over at the moment, like, the reason it works is because there's this huge divine concept that transcends everything in your life, the day-to-day. And it doesn't matter what you do. what desires you have, the temptations you may face, that belief that you have transcends everything. You would die for it. But the whole thing with religion is it implements things that keep that view in at top of mind at all times. So I had this conversation with this monk, this Benedictine monk, and one of the old sayings from Benedict was to keep death before your eyes daily. So that's a huge concept to grapple with. But keeping it before your eyes daily means that you never forget it and you live your life as though your life could end tomorrow. And that's what I'm trying to do. And I think that's the hole that making sure I bring the best of myself to the table plugs. I have certain huge goals that I want to achieve. But then in the boring day-to-day, it's how do I make sure I don't forget about those goals and make sure that everything still keeps on track and keeps me moving in that direction towards achieving what I want to achieve, because otherwise it will be forgotten about. So how can you make sure that you stay on track and stay on top of moving towards this thing that transcends everything? How do you remember that big thing when you're sat at a desk for the 8th hour and it's the same place that you've been sat in for the last 3 years or 5 years if you're at school, the same work cubicle? Like, how do you implement that into every single thing that you do? It's a big question. And religion definitely plugs that hole. There are rituals, if you look at something like Islam, they're praying 5 times a day. Like, it's impossible to forget about this God that created their world, because they're reminded of him minimum 5 times a day. And then all the artwork and the rest of it. So I guess one of the big questions I'm grappling with, not believing in God, is like, how do you sort of take, and people are going to hate me saying this that are like Christian or whatever, any religion, like, how do you take the key things in religion that remind you of this big thing in the day-to-day, and how do you use that in sort of a secular non-believer's way?
That's really interesting. I'm with you on, I think you described to a T how I feel about religion. Agnostic, non-believer, but open to believing. I definitely see all the benefits of having that ritual, the prayers. And I crave that, but I think I find that fulfillment through pursuing things like my podcast, or pursuing things like reading a book, or I don't know, working out. I'm a rock climber, doing things like that, doing things that make me feel alive. And those are the things that help me feel connected to my mission of just like living a better life. I don't think that you need to pray to feel that connection, but you need to replace those rituals with rituals of your own that remind you of your purpose, I guess.
Yeah, and the danger is if you do it in a secular way where you don't have this morality that's objective and given to you by God, at least in their opinions. The problem is that some of the things you tell yourself you're doing because they're good are just going to be because you want them and you desire the instant gratification for them, or maybe you even think that there's something longer in it, but actually it's just helping you build up this empire that's corrupt and playing to your ego rather than what's actually good for people. So it's something that I don't have the answer to, and I don't think anyone does. And I think if someone did, then it would convert a lot of people from being religious. Is how do you go about living a moral life that contributes to society without falling at these hurdles that you're naturally going to face along the way? Because it's all well and good saying that you have these fundamental principles that you stick to no matter what. It's great intellectualizing that and writing it down, like, do it. But are you going to stick to them when you're truly tested? Are you going to stick to your diet that you wrote out when you've got a really tasty cookie in your fridge waiting to be eaten. Like, it's less likely unless you had something so scary like the threat of hell. Not that you'd face the threat of hell for eating a cookie, but to take it into another example, like the idea of cheating on someone. Like, are you gonna stop yourself from cheating on your girlfriend if a really attractive girl that's like your dream, the perfect person, 12 out of 10, perfect personality, you would marry her, comes along and you're on holiday away from your girlfriend? Like, what are you going to do? I would say that I'm not going to cheat on my girlfriend because that's one of my core principles that I believe in. And I say that wholeheartedly, meaning it. I don't want to ever cheat on someone that I'm with. I think it's disgusting. I think it's amoral. And I think it's one of the worst things you can do to someone. But I'm going to be honest here. Like, I don't know 100% what's going to happen if I'm placed in that situation. And some people might watch this and think this is me saying that I'm out of control with my emotions and that I don't really mean what I'm saying with the fact that I think cheating is one of the worst things you can do. Like, I mean that, but I'm having the modesty to accept, or not modesty, the integrity to accept that I don't know what's going to be happen when that temptation is dangled in front of me if I don't have the fear of hell riding on it. And none of us do. Yeah. If we pretend that we know what's going to happen when we're truly confronted with these temptations that go against everything we believe in, we're lying to ourselves. Like, we have no clue. And this is the big problem I have as an agnostic and being constantly surrounded by religious people, is I genuinely think that it's a superpower and that they could resist any temptation because they've got this fear that transcends everything, as well as this pull factor of wanting to be one with God and being so grateful. They have this gratitude. But I don't know if you can live a moral and fulfilled life without that, or if you will crumble to your hedonistic desires. I simply don't know. And I really hope you can. But at the moment, all the evidence I'm seeing is it makes me pessimistic.
Yeah, we don't have that fear. We don't have a consequence that's laid out for us. When I talked to that rabbi on Tuesday, he said that he thinks people are atheists because they're scared of being wrong. I tried to be very respectful because he's a religious elder, he's a religious figure, so I didn't argue with him. But my argument to that is I think that religious people are living in constant fear of punishments, of going against these morals laid out for them, of hell, like you're talking about. And I think that drives you, at a sense, it can drive you to be a better person, or at least a more moral person. But also, I don't envy fear-based living, but I think the outcome of it is something that I would envy. It's an interesting thought experiment I've had going on for a pretty long time now.
Yeah. And what someone religious would say is, maybe they are living a much less satisfactory life in fear constantly, but they're doing what's moral, and that's all that matters. So I don't know what's true, and it's so difficult at this age as well to even grapple with these big concepts. But I think morality is a very complex thing, and it's one of the things I'm most interested in. What I've seen so far is that you need not just the carrot, but the stick.
Explain.
You need a fear, not just a reward. Because if you only have the reward, you're going to take shortcuts to get there. And that may go against your fundamental principles. It may mean screwing people over. It may mean lying. It may mean not being your authentic self. So I don't know how you combat that without religion. And that's not to say that religious people don't do that too. Like, trust me, they do. And then they repent. But I think we're much more likely as non-believers to take shortcuts and do things that go against our natural not intuitions, but our sort of set out principles that we'd want to think we'd live by, because we've got the carrot, and you're going to take shortcuts to get the carrot if there's no stick beating you.
That's interesting. I think that goes along well with the whole concept of my podcast, because people believe that they can escape their reality that they hate by chasing this external reward and going directly for the stick rather than taking a path and building upon something they love. But I think that a way to combat that, I'm not saying I have the answer, but I mean, the way that I'm proposing is build upon something you love, build upon the things that you're grateful for in your life, instead of trying to run away from that fear of instead of trying to run away from the things you're afraid of, instead of pushing yourself to this level, get pulled by the things that you love in your life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think gratitude is one of the most important things you could have, and it's one of the things that's fueled me. It's been a real driver for me, just accepting how fortunate I am, accepting how amazing it is that I've grown up in the UK, even where I've grown up in the UK, my parents, everything. It's the most I could have wished for. Like, where we are now compared to not just the rest of the world, but the rest of history is absolutely insane. So the least we can do is give it all we've got and try and do something truly great.
I think that's a perfect way to sum it up. Elliot, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you for having me, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get to look back on this in like 5 years and people will be watching this video like, look, these two podcast greats had a conversation together when they were both pretty small.
Let's see.
Hopefully.
Or maybe we'll be in LA, smacked up on Skid Row, enjoying some Fent.
Possibly, you can never rule that out. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Grateful Podcast featuring Elliot Bewick. This was, I think, my favorite episode I've done so far. It was so cool to connect with someone that was doing the same thing as me, that is doing the same thing as me, and trying to make a dent on the world and think so critically about different things. I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. If you did, please, please, please share this with anyone that you think would enjoy. That's the best way to help me out, just sharing this and leaving a review down below telling me what you liked, what you didn't like, so I can make this better for you and for me. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. Stay grateful.